Next thing I'm going to put together is the primary drive gear with the counterbalance shaft gear, drive gear actually, and then the counterbalance shaft gear. One thing that I want you to take note of, and it seems obvious, but I've had blasters in here that are vibrating and they're not put together right. These two gears mesh. They have to be timed. You have a dot and a dot. Those have to line up. When the assembly's finished, those two dots have to be aligned. The other thing I want to point out, we talked about circlips, and same thing goes with these washers. Any kind of lock washer that you have to bend over, anybody that's reusing it is an absolute fool. I mean, for the cost of these parts, these are so dirt cheap. And again, we don't charge you for these. I think this part right here is maybe $3, $3.50. Why take any chances? And you get a motor back or whatever, you open it up and you see that this has been bent. These are good for one bend, that's it. If you're lucky enough to get the other side, I won't do it. I think it's, it's perfectly acceptable, but I just think it's hack work. So we change these just for the cost of these parts. This is the lock washer for the gear for the counterbalance shaft. And again, very important, these two dots have to line up. We got the new lock washer in there and some blue Loctite. I'm going to remove this, and actually I take the blue Loctite and I just put it on the threads on the inside, but blue Loctite on both sets of threads for both nuts, and then I'll show you how I torque them, and I'll give you a hint, I don't use a penny. Went ahead and I got my blue Loctite on, and as I said, I don't use a penny. I've read some stuff, and I don't do it. I would never do anything like this, but I hear that if you put a penny in here, in essence, what you're doing is you're binding these gears that you can go ahead and torque this nut and torque this nut as well. Well, I'm sure it works. Like I said, I would never do anything like that in here. Back in the day, and I'll tell you how old I am, when I was 15, 16 years old riding dirt bikes, I used to come to my shop right now, which used to be called Danielson Suzuki, owned by Howie Myers, who's passed away, God rest his soul. And he had a mechanic. His name was Rich. Rich was the coolest guy I ever met in my life. He was without a doubt one of the best factory wrenchers I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Well, Rich kind of took me under his wing. I don't know why. I was a punk when I was that young, and gave me all kinds of tips and pointers. And Rich gave me this. This is called a tuning fork, because it makes that noise. And what I do with this, I've had this forever, is I actually get it underneath the connecting rod, and that's what this thing's for, and it supports the rod. Now at this point I'm going to be able to apply the proper torque here, and no, this will not distort your rod. And I've been using this thing forever. I've never had a problem with it, but it's called a tuning fork. And what's really cool about it, it's actually got the Suzuki logo on it, so it's a genuine Suzuki tool, and works great. But that's how I'm going to torque this. I'm going to torque the primary nut to 58 foot-pounds, and I'm going to torque the balance gear nut, counterbalance shaft gear nut to 40 foot-pounds. Everything's all torqued up. I'll show you an easy way to bend these things. Just use a set of channel locks. This obviously has two bends in it, so at its proper torque you just find the one that's closest to it, and you get a set of channel locks on it like this, and just squeeze it. What that'll do is provide its locking force. But Yamaha superseded this part number to something else. What that means is that they found that they already had a part in existence that would work for these. You have to be very careful bending this over. You don't want it to go past flush with this nut, because if it does, it's going to hit the back of your clutch basket. And the easy fix for that is just, knock it around a little bit, lay it down. It's very close. Most of them don't, but some of them do. We found that in here. So just get that bent over, and that's going to lock that nut in. Next thing we're going to do is put the clutch components in. You've got your conical washer, you have a spacer, you have the spacer that goes between the two baskets, and you can tell it's got the cutouts in it. New lock washer. Same thing with that. I mean, I'm not going to put that on. I'm not going to reuse something that's already been used. And then the nut. And we'll show you how we do that. Real easy. Bit of lube. Conical washer. More lube. Flat washer. More lube. clutch basket. When you put this on, it has to engage all of the gears. Like that. It's a new clutch basket. These things come in here pretty beat up, I'll tell you what. There it is. Inner basket. And then I'm going to apply some blue Loctite to this and then get everything torqued up. The next step is to go ahead and tighten the clutch boss nut, we call it. And I use this tool. This is actually a tusk tool, and necessary evil. You got to be careful with these things. You don't want to squeeze on these. You can actually crush the inner basket. So we just use this to hold it and then tighten this down to 58 foot-pounds. You can take an old clutch plate. I would actually use 2 or 3 of them, the steel plates, and put them together, and then take a heavy bar, weld everything together. And I mean, you can use that tool if you want to. It's a cheap fix. I think I paid $25 for this. Well worth it. But this is something you're going to have. Do not hit this with an impact wrench and get torque. Just don't do it. You're going to over torque it. You're going to start stressing things out in your transmission. You need this tool. So I'm going to tighten this to 58 foot-pounds. Got my nut torqued. Next thing I'm going to do is bend over this washer. Same way with the channel locks. Be careful with these. You can pop these off if you slip and you smash into this. You might break it off. So be careful when you do that. One other thing I'll caution you on: when you get to this point, this should be turning free. If this is locked up, something's wrong. So the next step is go ahead and bend over that lock washer with your channel locks. The next part of the assembly is going to be the clutch actuator, and you've got the actual actuator itself, a spring, a little dirt guard. Make sure you get that in there over the seal, the clutch ball that I know when you took this motor apart you probably lost it. If you need one, you can get them on my website. And then the actuating rod. I'll show you a little trick we do to these rods. When you look at this rod, see if you can see that. See that little indent in it? I don't like that. I want to get rid of that. So I have a Quickway valve grinder in here, and I actually lock it up, and I'll grind this thing flat on both sides and then chamfer it to make sure we got a good assembly. Alright, so that's what I'm talking about. Just go ahead and we grind both ends on this shaft and get a nice fresh surface. The other thing you want to look out for is on the actuator. Right here, this looks a lot more worn on camera than it actually is. I can't even feel this, but you just want to make sure you don't have any big grooves in here. And I'll tell you another trick if you're handy. You can actually weld this and then machine it back down again and get this thing, instead of buying a new piece, you can get them to work like that. I've done it many times, and saves the customer money, and it's a good repair. I'll show you how we put this together next. Alright, got my seal in there. Second verse, same as the first, man. PC seal grease on the inside, blue Loctite, a little bit of oil on the bearing, and my actuator. Put my dirt guard in there, and then just drop her in. Make sure everything's moving nice and smooth. Okay, back to the clutch side. Just gonna shoot some oil in here. Take my refurbished rod with the new ends, drop that in, a little bit more oil, drop your clutch ball in, and that's it for that step. These are the components of the clutch. You got your steel plates, your fiber plates. You get a spring washer that goes in there with one plate that looks different. That's why I kind of have it laid out. We're not going to use it, but you can see the inside diameter is much larger than the regular clutch plates. You got your clutch springs, your bolts, and your pressure plate with your rod. We did the same thing with this rod that we did to the other rod, and went ahead and machined the end of it. And we're not taking a lot. And all of this, anything that we took off of it, we're going to be able to suck back up with that adjustment. Alright, as I said, we got rid of that first friction plate with the ring on it. I'm just going to use a regular friction plate. Drop some oil down here. Slide the plate in. Next thing I'm going to do is discuss the steel plates. Alright, if you look at one of these steel plates, it's got a little boss on the top of it, and you can see the diameter of it changes. The last thing you want to do is line all of these up, because it's going to throw everything out of balance. I've been asked this question a million times. I don't know if this is the right answer, but this is what we do and it works. You have 6 steel plates. You have 23 grooves in this inner basket. You do the math, it doesn't work out. So what I do is I mark 1, and then I count 4 grooves. 1, 2, 3, 4. I mark the next one. I do that again, again, and again. Then I go 1, 2, 3, mark that, 1, 2, 3, and that's where my last one's going to go. That's as close to this thing being in balance as we can possibly get it. So that's how I'm going to put these plates in. So what I do is shoot some oil around the fiber plate. Take the clutch plate. If you feel this clutch plate, you're going to feel it smooth on one side and it's really sharp on the other. Put the sharp side down. Drop the first one in. Hit it with some oil. Throw the next fiber plate in, and then just alternate. Everywhere you see that boss, you know you counted 4, put the boss here next. Alright, so that's what you got when you're done. The 6 plates, obviously you alternate the steel plate. You put a fiber plate in first, alternate with the steel, then fiber, steel, fiber, steel, fiber, and mark it off, like I say, 4, and then at the end, just 1, 2, 3, and lay it in there, and that's as close to being balanced as you're possibly going to get it. Next thing I'm going to do is install a pressure plate. There's 2 things that have to happen here. You got to locate this mark on the inner basket. It's that little, there's only one of them on there. And then look at your pressure plate. You got a little mark here. And that's how you want to install it. So those 2 marks line up and just make sure the gears engage. Next step's pretty simple. Just install the springs. These springs, you can put them in any direction you want. Usually, in any kind of engine, any spring, if you look at the coil wind on it, if it's tighter on one side than the other, that usually always goes to the bottom. And I'll tell you one more mod that you haven't heard of probably or seen, something we do in here. We cut 20 thousandths off of this, and what that does is give these springs a little bit more pressure, and that's not going to hurt anything. Be cautioned, if you take more than that, I haven't found the limit yet, but if you get it so it's so tight that it's working the way it's supposed to, you're going to explode everything in here. We found 20 thousandths is very safe, and it definitely makes a difference. So the next thing you do is just drop these springs over the pressure plate. Went ahead and installed the springs and put the spring retainer bolts in and torque those down to 4.3 foot-pounds. I'll caution you here too. If you over torque these, you're going to take your inner basket and you're going to rip that boss right out. So torque is important here. Alright, now that we got the clutch all assembled, this rod is what actually adjusts the clutch. So watch, as I turn this in, you can see the actuating lever moving out. What you want to do is get this in a position to where the point on the end of the actuator is lined up with this little point on the case. And I have that right there. So you can see by removing the material off the actuating shafts inside of the engine, we still have plenty of room to get this thing adjusted. So what I'll do next is I'll remove the nut here, put a little bit of blue Loctite on it, and lock everything back together, and then just check and make sure it's all lined up still.